reference it. So hello everyone, my name is Laura Garcia and I oversee employer relations in the Emory Career Center, and I'll let Phil introduce himself.
Hey everyone, I'm Phil Smith. I'm a recruitment manager with Cityyear, sitting out of Atlanta.
All right, and just a couple of housekeeping things. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, certainly feel free to submit those through Q&A. That's the preferred mode, but you can also chat those in and we'll get to them as we can. So, all right, to get us started. Sorry, just one moment. There we go. All right. So when it comes to getting started in terms of getting ready for the career fair, the first thing that you want to do is to go ahead and look up the organizations and what they're hiring for on Handshake. Some will have posted this and it'll be listed in the job listing section within Handshake. However, there are some employers who haven't posted their positions yet or will try to post their positions only on their company website. So please try to go ahead and look over those so that way you're prepared going into any meetings that you have with employers. So think of this career fair as being very different than any other career fair that you've been to before. It is different from an in-person fair in that you have to pre-schedule all of your meetings with employers. So you'll either have to sign up for a group session or a one-on-one meeting with employers. When you log into Handshake, you'll see the available sessions option in there, and that's where you can go through and review the sessions that have been signed up so far. Now, in order for you to sign up for these either group or one-on-one sessions, you need to go ahead and update your Handshake profile and set your profile to employer or community visibility. You won't be able to register for the fair without doing that. And please note, you do need to include your GPA and class year. There are some employers who are going to set certain parameters around the meetings, specifically one-on-one sessions, where they may only want to speak with junior level students for internships, for example. I did have one student who was unable to sign up for an employer session, and it's because she had no GPA listed. So just be aware, if you don't have a GPA within Handshake listed or it's out of date, that'll prevent you from signing up for some one-on-ones as well. Please note that your Handshake profile will be the resume employers see during the fair. So you won't actually be able to show your resume to an employer during the event. They may drive you to apply for a job on Handshake so they can see it, or through their company website, for example. So your Handshake profile is the resume that you're giving during the fair. However, you do need to make sure that you have your materials together, your resume on hand in case you need to refer to it. Make sure that you have a notepad, something to jot down some notes, pen, and appropriate attire. So make sure that you are fully dressed as well. So I would recommend a suit, if at all possible, at minimum a jacket. That would make the strongest impression to most employers. So what are some other thoughts that you might have, Phil?
I just want to say that there's a little bit more work this time around on the front end, but it's really going to pay off as we move forward with this. So when you have all of your materials together, that's going to create a more complete picture of who you are. It's going to show you as a more rounded individual when you show up visually dressed properly, when you have your resume already locked and loaded, as well as your Handshake profile, because that's going to have more details perhaps about extracurriculars that you may not have put on your resume and things of that nature.
All right. Okay, so let's kind of walk through the resume. This isn't a resume workshop, but I wanted to just go through a couple of key things that you should have, outlined, whether it's your resume or your Handshake profile. So let's just go through a couple quick things. Number one, make sure all of your contact information is listed. So phone number, email, now more than ever, it's difficult to connect with people. So the more information that you have listed, the easier it is to connect with you. Your phone number in particular is going to be most important, as that may be the initial outreach after this conversation that they have with you during the fair. They may call and set up an interview with you, for example. So make sure all of this is up to date, and think about your voicemail as well. Make sure it's professional and leaves a solid first impression. All right, so a couple of other things. Education, of course, make sure you've got your GPA listed. If it's a 3.0 or higher, you can add in relevant coursework. If you did a study abroad, you can include that. And if you're a first year or second year student, you can still have some high school information in there. However, once you get to that junior and senior year, employers are going to expect for you to have still been involved and active during college. So you'll want to start replacing that with new information. So in your experience section, you can include anything and everything that was paid, unpaid, volunteer, either lab work or a project. The key with this particular section, and this is frankly the most important section to most employers, is you don't want to, solely focus on tasks. This is where you really want to highlight your qualifications, your skills, your accomplishments. And there are a couple of example bullets listed down here. So promoted to lead lifeguard after 2 summers due to performance. If you're promoted, you received a raise, that shows a pattern of success. And many employers believe the best predictor of future performance is past performance. So showing that is very positive to employers. So exhibited excellent customer service while overseeing, a dining room that holds 100 plus patrons. You designed program brochures and flyers for a residential community of over 50 students. Couple of other things, make sure that you're quantifying whenever possible. That helps someone to better understand the level of experience that you have. And this is one of my favorite examples as well. So utilize SQL to maintain a database of over 2,000 customer accounts. Not only should you be listing technical skills that you've gained, but also talk about when you applied those, if at all possible, outside of the classroom. And I noticed we had a question come in, so let me pop this up. All right, so if my US number is inactive, should I leave it off my resume? Great question. If it is not active, I would go ahead and leave it off your resume because an employer may be confused about, why it's listed and they can't contact you. So if you have the ability to set something up through Google, or if there's another number that you can list, an international number, you may want to do that. Do you have other thoughts, Phil, like in terms of experience or other ways that you would recommend students get in contact with you in a similar situation?
Yes, a lot of students use maybe Google Voice numbers that they can set up. Also, once you do set up a number, you can include that in the signature of your email. If an employer is trying to contact you, they'll often look there to try to find additional ways that we can touch base with you.
Mm-hmm. This may be one of those circumstances where it would be easier for you to just perhaps note on, say if you submitted a resume, maybe star by your email and say email is the best contact. Usually in different circumstances, you may not necessarily need to do that, but obviously we know everything right now is very different than usual. So that would be my recommendation. Just note in your heading that email is the best mode of communication with you. All right. So, oops, let me go back. So involvement, do be sure that you're listing out any student involvement that you have. So the student organization name, any leadership role that you had, your title. Again, kind of like your experience section, you want to highlight what your skills were that you developed through this, any accomplishments that you had. Do not solely focus on tasks. My biggest pet peeve is when people say, attended weekly meetings. That is the bare minimum requirement of being involved in a student organization. So you need to include things like how you supervised a committee of 5 members and you oversaw marketing efforts of the group, how you provided 10 hours of service weekly to provide services for veterans. So again, treat it like an experience section. So skills, if you are going for a more technical role, you definitely need to have this section on your resume. And you may want to consider, qualifying your level of skill in this particular area. So if you're highly proficient in, SQL, Java, whatever, you can list it out that way. Now, languages, for example, do be careful when listing this on your resume and indicating the level. If you're not sure if you're fluent in Hindi, for example, don't list it. It's better for you to somewhat, lower the expectations of maybe basic Hindi and then impress an interviewer if they perhaps speak that language, than for you to set the expectation up pretty high and then not be able to meet that. Any other thoughts in terms of the resume and presenting yourself perhaps through the handshake profile, Phil?
Yeah, a few thoughts here. First, going back to the voicemail, you definitely want to make sure that that is professional. Oftentimes, that is our first touch point with you, and voicemails that are distracting or otherwise not showing you as you will want to show yourself at work can really quickly take you out of the running. And in addition, you want to make sure that that voicemail can be left. Oftentimes, when I call students, their voicemail is full or not set up. So that's a quick task that you can do that will help you further along with this journey. In addition, when it comes to the email, you don't necessarily have to use your school email, but the preference is using the email that you will check the most. There are a lot of times and a lot of communications that are going out. So you want to make sure that you're seeing these things that are coming through, as well as checking your spam folders. Sometimes these automated emails might go directly to your spam from these employers as they may be sending out newsletters to you. Again, when it comes to some of your bullet points on your resume, you can think through maybe a simple formula of you did A, by doing B, which resulted in C. So that's a way that can help you to really think through some of those outcomes that Laura mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm. I think these are great points. And not only should you be thinking about this in terms of the resume and how you're presenting yourself, when you start thinking through this can help you in your conversations during the career fair and best represent yourself. And the career fair is just an introduction. The purpose of the career fair is to figure out how do you apply to that job or that opportunity. And they'll be scheduling ideally interviews with you following up. So it's important for you to have thought through this for the career conversation and also start getting in the mindset of what are you going to talk about when you get into an interview setting. All right, so that's it in terms of the resume. So just to show you what this looks like a little bit on Handshake. So here's my sample student profile. So a couple of things I wanted to note here. Try to get your profile 100% complete. That means that you filled out all of the necessary sections and you will have made a strong impression on employers. Note up here where it has, my journey. I put, I'm interested in careers in advertising, marketing, and politics. I'm seeking a part-time position in media or communications in the Washington, D.C. area for summer 2021. I think this is a great way to introduce yourself, but do be careful with it. So if you are planning to speak to very different employers, you may want to keep it a little bit more basic for this particular interaction with employers. You may say something about, seeking a summer internship broadly, versus going into the specifics of advertising, marketing, et cetera. Because if you're speaking to Home Depot and you're applying for a job that's not in that field, they may think that they're not really, who you're seeking to work with. So just be aware of that. And do make sure your profile is visible to employers, students, and alumni. You have the option to set it to community or employers. I personally like it set to community because you can actually message students through Handshake as well if you've never done that. But just make sure that you set this visibility up. Again, because if you don't set it up to where it's accessible to employers or community, you won't be able to interact during the fair. All right, so when it comes to actually getting ready for the event and getting ready to talk to an employer, you need to research quite a few things. So of course, any open positions that you can find, understand their overall products or services, any industry trends, make sure that you're just doing a basic search of any news or headlines that are related to that organization, understand who are their customers, what are they providing, and locations. If location is very important to you, you only want to be in certain regions of the US or internationally, for example, you need to be aware of who they are and where they operate. What are some things that you like to see in terms of, showing off your research, Phil? How can a student show that they were prepared for a meeting with you, for example?
I really do like that news and headlines aspect of showing your research because that's showing that you are aware of the trends that are going on right here and right now. City Year, we're an education-focused nonprofit. So if students are talking to us more specifically about the advantages or disadvantages of distance learning, that would be a great way to foster a natural conversation. I think that the news and headlines is a great way to keep you in in your conversation without really slowing down. And one of the advantages of being virtual is that you can keep a notepad with you. You don't have to just keep those on the top of your mind. You can jot those down and have those ready and locked and loaded to talk to the employers.
Mhm. I think that's a really good point. And after you introduce yourself to the employer, you ask a couple of questions about, the opportunity that you're interested in learning more about. That's when you can shift and really say, actually, I just saw, blank in the news. How is City Year responding to all these schools going virtual versus some, still holding in-person classes? So that just fosters an interesting conversation. So the more that you understand about the organization, that can also help you to have a more natural conversation.
Definitely agree on that. One final point, when you are talking about news and headlines, think about maybe keeping it in a positive way. So for instance, maybe talking about how Google is allowing their employees to work from home for till 2021 versus maybe discussing Amazon and the conditions of the warehouse. You want to make sure that you're keeping things positive and keeping that interaction, this initial interaction with your recruiter, positive so that they want to keep that conversation going rather than maybe pivot to something else quickly.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an excellent point. So, we mentioned this a little bit earlier in terms of meeting employers during the fair, but note that this is different, of course, than an in-person fair. In an in-person fair, you can just walk up and talk to whoever you want. However, with the online fair, everything is pre-scheduled. So the group sessions will be 30 minutes in length, and you can only attend one group session at a time. So if two organizations are presenting from 1 to 1:30, you have to pick between the two. One-on-ones will be locked for 10 minutes. So you do want to make sure that you are logging in at least 5 minutes early for either one-on-ones or group sessions. But do be aware that some additional slots may open up as we get closer to the day of the fair, so you need to be checking daily. So these could open up because another student canceled their particular meeting with an employer. It may be that they start adding more one-on-ones or group sessions because they see a demand from Emory students that they're signing up and filling all the slots. So just be aware this is a very dynamic sort of event. This isn't something that you can just log in one time and everything's going to be set. Just so you all know, we have been constantly reminding employers to, set up their group sessions as well as their one-on-ones, but employers are having a learning curve right now. So if you actually log into the student view of Handshake, you're looking at the career fair, you will see 360 magazine, for example. It's the very first employer when you log in. It says no available sessions. That doesn't mean that their sessions are completely booked, that you can't schedule to attend a group session or a one-on-one. They just haven't set it up yet. So just be aware of that. You didn't miss out on an opportunity. They just haven't scheduled it yet. But we're talking with employers daily, reminding them. So again, just keep checking back. Again, in the virtual career fair event information, there are two really, really helpful articles that I would strongly recommend you read through. So the student experience of the fair and how students sign up for sessions. So if you're unsure of how to sign up for a session, read through that article. It's hyperlinked within the career fair information. But also I think it's helpful to read through and visually see the student experience of the fair. All of this is going to be measured or will be managed through Handshake. So go ahead, review it now. So that way, when you show up the day of the fair and for your meetings, you know exactly what it will look like. All right, so I see somebody chatted in a question. All right, so the question is, should we attend group sessions if we want to attend one-on-ones, or is it okay just to attend one-on-ones? You can do both if you want to, or you can do one or the other. It depends on the schedule. So for the group session, it may be helpful for you to get a better overview of the organization straight from the employer. Oh, sorry, let me go back. I accidentally hit that. I guess maybe that's a good question for you, Phil. If there's a group session and a one-on-one, would you expect students to sign up for both? What do you think?
I would not expect students to sign up for both, but if you do see a name that's repeated, that's going to have them stick out a little bit more to you because they're showing a little bit more interest. They're showing, I want to learn a little bit more broadly about what you all do. And now I have specific questions. that I would like to speak with the recruiter one-on-one with. So I don't think you have to do both. It definitely, I think, will put you in a positive light, but I don't think it's mandatory to do both.
Mm-hmm. If you had to pick between the two, personally, I would select one-on-ones naturally because it's only you and that other person on the screen. So you have the ability, to stand out and make a solid first impression versus the group session, which I'll actually show you the interface in just a minute here. It's still important for you to be there. You can get noticed by chatting and questions, but just be aware that you will be in there with other students. So you standing out versus others may be a little bit more difficult versus one-on-ones. So great question. All right, so let's kind of go through impressions a little bit more in depth. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the interface of what it would look like for a group session. So it would also look pretty similar for one-on-ones as well, where you'll see someone on the other screen and you'll be chatting back and forth, very similar to what it looks like for you likely on Zoom. Now, a couple of things to be aware of. You do need to be mindful of your background. So right now, Handshake doesn't allow for you to have a virtual background. So you've got to try to plan what you want behind you. So personally, I always have a white background because I think it's easier for people to focus on, the conversation that we're having. But again, totally up to you. Just be sure if you're using a different background, people aren't walking behind you. Be mindful of the sound in the background as well. Try to unmute yourself when appropriate. Note that when you first join the call, you will be muted. So you have to unmute yourself. And make sure that you have fully joined the session. So I've heard from some other schools that have actually done the virtual career fair through Handshake in the past that sometimes students can get confused where they log in, they're on this landing page. You need to make sure that you click join. So that way you're not just waiting there and the employer's waiting on the other side of the screen thinking that you didn't show up on time. And I really like this tip. So someone shared having your LinkedIn profile link handy. So LinkedIn naturally should look very much like your resume and hopefully even expand upon it by being able to show examples of your work, so on and so forth. So that can be a good thing for you to have ready. So if you through this virtual fair, you can't share a resume through the platform. So that's definitely a limitation, but that's where your Handshake profile comes into play. But you could also leave a LinkedIn link so that employer could get a better sense of your background. What are some thoughts that you have in terms of, the overall experience, Phil, in interacting online?
I think that background piece and your noise is going to be very important. Again, some of these interactions are very short. So again, this is a 10-minute slot that you're having. So if you have a lot of background noise, it's hard for the employer to hear you. That unfortunately is going to create a negative bias against you before you really even start. So you really want to make sure that you're presenting yourself the best way possible. So it might take a little bit of planning if you can't do so at home. Maybe you can find somewhere that is quiet, but definitely make sure to plan to have a quiet space where you can hear and also be heard effectively, as well as that LinkedIn. I think that is a great tip. If you're able to send that to the employer at the end or even the beginning of your interaction, they'll likely note that, keep that tab open and revisit you when they're doing their follow-ups because you took that extra step.
Mm-hmm. So kind of going on what Phil said as well, you'll notice right now I'm wearing headphones. I have a 3-year-old daughter, can never predict what sort of noise that she'll make. And I knew this webinar was happening and it would be recorded. So headphones really help. It helps to minimize external noise. But one thing I think is important, the good thing about everything going virtual and all the difficulties we've all been facing the previous months, I think people are pretty sympathetic and empathetic to what's going on in everybody's, personal situation. So if it's difficult to find a quiet space, just be open and just say, I'm so excited to meet you today. I do want to let you know I've tried to find a quiet space. However, I live in a smaller apartment and, I have a sibling that has to take class as well as at the same time. So I'm doing my best to minimize noise, but I wanted to make you aware of that. Again, it just shows consideration and that you're aware of potential distractions. So when it comes to introducing yourself, you'll definitely want to include, of course, your name, your major. If you're a junior, senior, sophomore, for example, I really like it when people include a career objective or why they're talking to the employer. I think that makes a really solid impression. And within your introduction, you'll want to highlight things like your previous experience. So part-time jobs, internships, volunteer experience, any sort of leadership involvement, potentially skills, or, of course, as mentioned earlier, your major, but also if you've taken specific courses that you think may be relevant for them to know. So let's kind of look at what this looks like in real time. So a sample pitch and introduction may look like this. Hello, I'm Mariah Washington. Hi, Mariah, I'm John. How may I help you? Well, to introduce myself, I'm a third-year psychology and biology student seeking internship opportunities within the pharmaceutical industry. And I was drawn to Eli Lilly due to your excellent reputation and training program. Through my experience working at the Lab for Interdisciplinary Study of Social Behavior, I have gained the basics of laboratory research, which I think would well qualify me for the blank role I saw in Handshake. I'm also involved in the Psi-Chi Honor Society, which has given me the opportunity to lead other students. Could you please tell me more about that opportunity or others you think may be a good fit based on my background? So kind of short, sweet, to the point. It shows that research, it shows enthusiasm. And also want to point out, I oftentimes have heard from employers that, as soon as they walk into a conversation with the employer, they kind of forget that, hi, I'm, Laura Garcia, for example. No, hi, Laura, it's nice to meet you. I'm Phil Smith. And they just automatically launch into a pitch, and it can be a little bit awkward. So what do you think about that sort of topic, Phil? What do you think about introductions? What have you noticed?
Yeah, you definitely want to keep that human aspect. As we mentioned in the last slide, everyone is adjusting to this digital landscape. So that's always a way to introduce yourself, introduce this environment so that you all are kind of level setting with one another, and allows both parties to extend grace to each other. And then you can get into your pitch. Because again, as we've been mentioning, this is kind of the first introduction of who you are to the employer, and it doesn't have to be the last. So you can kind of ease yourself into some of this. When it comes to this pitch, I really love it. Some of the things that really stand out to me would be the ending. Good fit based on my background for other positions. That is helping the recruiter understand that you're open to different ideas. Maybe they know something that you don't. Maybe this position has already closed, or they know something that might be opening in the future. This helps them to really get those wheels turning to see where you might fit in their organization. Again, giving that information and that context of why you're there, where you've been and where you want to go is helpful to keep those wheels again turning and moving to see if you are someone that they can see in their company.
Mm-hmm. That's great. All right, so a couple of things in terms of wrapping up your conversations with employers. Make sure that you understand what you have to do after this conversation. Do you need to go and apply to a job on Handshake? Do you need to apply on their company website? They may say, our applications won't open until October. So just be aware of that. I've spoken with many employers who frankly are still trying to figure out their hiring numbers and exactly which roles they will be hiring for moving forward. So I know there will be some employers that participate that say, I'm so excited to meet you. We haven't posted the role yet, but I need you to come look back towards the end of September and Handshake to apply. So you may very well have that mentioned to you, and they're not blowing you off. It's just they're still figuring out specific numbers. Make sure you collect contact information. So you could ask them, may I follow up with you via email? Note that some employers may not give this information to you. And that's not meant as a personal insult to you. They may just prefer that you go through, the same processes as every other student. But if you can collect that information, if they share that with you, do follow up with a thank you note. So now more than ever, I would recommend, following up with a thank you note. Personally, just email. So many employers are working from home right now. So even if you sent something to a physical address, they probably wouldn't give it or get it, I should say. In a regular sort of situation, I think handwritten is really nice because so few people do it. But for now, I would just say email. And I see a question came in through chat. All right, so what does the next step usually look like? All right, Phil, what do you think in terms of next steps after career fairs?
I think it does depend on the employer and the specific situation, but typically you want to make sure that you're understanding when and how you're going to communicate with the employer. So let's say, to use the prior example, the employer lets you know the position will be open in October. Okay, how should I follow up with you to let you know that I'm applying for that? Are there any opportunities between now and October to engage with you? Can I connect with you on LinkedIn? These are the types of questions that you want to be asking the employers so that they again are seeing that you are eager and enthusiastic about these opportunities, as well as give you additional face time and opportunity to leverage this initial meeting with the employers.
Mhm. Great response. All right, I see another question came in. All right, okay. All right, I think we're set. All right, oh, sorry, I just completely went out of whack. Sorry, guys. All right, let's go back here. All right, so a couple additional tips I want to make sure you all were aware of. All right, so make sure that you're arriving to these scheduled meetings early. So the way that Handshake is set up, you may not be able to join the group or one-on-one sessions until 5 minutes before. But either way, it's important for you to be there early, because showing up exactly at 1 p.m. or whenever your particular event is scheduled, many recruiters will view that as you being late. So just be aware of that. Make sure that you take notes as they're talking. That's okay for you to do. You may not be able to remember all the follow-up things that they tell you to do. So take notes. Try to find that quiet place for your meeting if at all possible, or at least address the fact that there may be some extraneous noise. Don't forget about the background. Try to make sure that it's not distracting in any way. And throughout, you need to make sure that you're being professional, you're friendly, and you're showing that enthusiasm, throughout the conversation. And don't forget that importance of small talk. So right now we're all dealing with the pandemic in different ways. There are social justice issues going on in the US. There are a lot of negative things that are going on. It's important for you to be aware of that, but when somebody asks how you are, try to keep it positive as much as possible. Remember, this is your first impression, and you want to put your best foot forward. If you start talking too much in depth about, how negative things are, it may not leave the most positive impression. So be careful about what you're talking about and how you're presenting yourself. Do make sure that you're checking Handshake daily. As I mentioned earlier, additional group and or one-on-one sessions will be added. Students can cancel one-on-one sessions, and we're encouraging students to do that by Wednesday, September 9th. So after that date, you may see additional one-on-one sessions open up because maybe students change their mind, schedule with another employer, or no longer have the same availability. All right, I saw a question come in. All right, so the question is there a way to contact a company you do not have a meeting with? If so, how would you appropriately contact them to show your interest? Great question. So through Handshake, if you look up that individual employer profile, some of them will have a public address that you can email. Some will not, but that would be the first way I would go about doing it. Some of these employers will also have information sessions, so you could attend that and get contact information that way. Some employers, unfortunately, if the schedule's just not lining up, through the Career Center, we don't have the ability to share employer contact information because we're kind of the gatekeepers. If they tell us not to share it, they want students to go through, these formalized processes of either applying through Handshake or through their company website. That's kind of unfortunately what we have to do. But don't forget other tools like LinkedIn. You could reach out to an alum, working at an organization of interest and go about it that way. You could also try to connect with someone listed, in HR with that organization if it's not listed in Handshake. So there are ways to get around that. What do you think, Phil?
I definitely like the LinkedIn strategy you mentioned of trying to connect with an alum. That would be a great way for you to, again, set up another meeting, hopefully, with that individual to give you more access and information about that organization since you weren't able to attend in person.
Mhm. Very good. All right. Okay, so a couple of things again after the fair. Likely you'll be filling out several online applications, and just be aware the recruiter will be looking for your application. Make sure that you're following instructions and don't blow this off. So, I've worked with some students over the years that get frustrated and say, well, I met them. Why do I need to, go and apply online? What was the point of this conversation if that was all that they wanted me to do? And the point of the conversation is that you're making a first impression. You're starting to build a relationship with someone, but there are certain processes you absolutely have to go through. Employers may have to follow equal employment opportunity, regulations in terms of hiring. And, there are just certain things that you have to do to be legally compliant and to make sure that you're equally considering candidates for job opportunities. So if they tell you to apply online through their company website, do that. And make sure that you follow both steps. Some employers will want you to both apply through Handshake and through their company website. If you don't do both, you don't get considered. Do be aware interviews many times are scheduled shortly after. So make sure that you're practicing interviewing. So if you're logged into Handshake and you go to the Career Center tab and then resources, we actually have a great resource called Interview Stream where you can practice, you can film yourself. Now more than ever, pretty much all of your interviews will either be, video, or it may be a phone interview. So you need to get used to seeing yourself on the screen and talking back to an employer. So practice that. I know it's not very natural all the time watching your face and watching you talk. It can be intimidating. So it's something you absolutely have to practice. And do make sure that you're aware after the conversation, there may be an expectation that you'll attend an upcoming information session or another future event. I know some employers that are, putting some professional development workshops on after the career fair, and they want to continue in engaging in the conversation with potential candidates. So just be aware of that. What are some other things you think students may or should expect after the fair, Phil?
I would say manage your expectations. A lot of students will put a lot of pressure on themselves that they will get those immediate follow-ups from each and every employer. Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes it might be the case, but just manage those expectations and then give yourself a little grace when it comes to that. It's one thing I definitely tell students when they are wrapping up the career fair, and also expect to maybe be the initiator of some of these follow-ups. That's going to be very important, as the volume that these employers are maybe working with might be a little higher than you might expect. In addition, recognize that some of the employers that are representing the organization may not be the actual hiring manager. So when you are having your conversations, maybe avoid some of the higher technical terms that you might be speaking of, just so that you're making sure that they are understanding what you are speaking about.
Mm-hmm. That's a really great point. I think patience is a key thing to think about here. In particular, the bigger the organization, if it's a brand you know and love and you've heard of all throughout your life, Nike, for example, is participating in the fair. It's probably going to take them just a little while to respond back to you, mainly because there may be 30, 40, 50 emails that they receive from students. So that takes a little bit of time. So patience is key. And also don't be afraid to follow up. So, wait for a week, see if they respond back to you. If they didn't, it wouldn't hurt for you to follow up if you had a basic question. But be aware when you're sending an email, if you just follow up to say, thank you so much for the opportunity to meet with you during the career fair, I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to next steps. There isn't necessarily a reason for the employer to respond back to you. You know what I mean? So if you ask a question that kind of changes things. So if you might say, is it all right if I follow up with you after I submit my application? Again, that might get a response back. But if you're just saying thank you, they may not respond back. Doesn't mean that they didn't care that you sent that. It may just be that there's no need to continue the conversation. And I think I see a chat question came in. All right. So the question is, what do we do if we have a one-on-one right after a group session? Would it be fine to leave the group session a few minutes earlier? Absolutely. I wouldn't worry about that. And this is, again, one of the situations where we're all learning as we go. And I think people are extending a lot more grace than they typically would in different situations. So if you need to leave a group session, you could say, thank you very much for the information. I have, a meeting following this, this particular session. I hope we can keep in touch. Maybe leave your email address, link to your LinkedIn account. Try to make sure that you're at least getting enough information in terms of next steps. Thank them before you leave and just let them know you have to go to another meeting. You don't have to say, I'm meeting another employer, I've got another one-on-one. That information is not really necessary. I would just say I have another meeting that's starting right at 2:30 and I have to go, but I hope we can stay in touch. Thank you so much for your time. All right. All right, so we've thrown a lot of information at you all. So if you all have any questions, feel free to chat them in through Q&A or the chat. We'll wait just a minute for any to come in. All right, I see one here. All right, so how do we connect with employers during a group session when there are a lot of other students as well? So the employer will be presenting an overview of their organization. So they may share their screen. It may be someone just talking to you about the experience, either their personal experience in that role or next steps to apply. So you may be doing just more listening, but the way to get noticed is chatting in questions. And not only just basic questions, but good questions. So remember how we recommended that you do all of this research leading up to your meetings, right? So you might say, if I was speaking with Phil, I might say, right now, if you're looking at the news, different school districts are either meeting in person or doing virtual learning. So a good question might be, after I learned the basics of the application process for City Year, Phil, can you speak to how City Year is responding to school systems moving online versus teaching in person? How does that impact, the City Year role? That's a really interesting, conversation. That's a way to get noticed because it shows you've done your research. It's showing that you're interested. So that would be my recommendation. Any other thoughts, Phil?
I couldn't agree more. I think that the question and answer portion is going to be your best bet in that group setting specifically to get noticed, and asking detailed questions that are a little bit higher level than maybe what does the day-to-day look like. Oftentimes you can find that information online.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? I know Phil mentioned he wanted to share just a couple of kind of final tips. All right, so let's see, if possible, can you please go over the resume part again? Yes, the recording will be made available. So everyone that's still on the call, I'm going to post this onto the Emory Career Center's YouTube page, so you can feel free to go back to that. But know that we have a great resume guide that's on the Career Center website, so career.emory.edu. We have a tab at the top that says preparation, and then you'll see an option, resumes, so on and so forth. Once you open that up, you'll see our resume guide there. And I'd strongly recommend looking through those sample resumes and reading through how we describe the different sections and the type of content you should put in the different sections. So check that out, and this recording will also be made available. Right.
Yeah, that resume guide is very useful. I have a copy of it right here. I use it all the time.
Oh, great. That's awesome. All right, so a question came in. I scheduled a one-on-one before a group meeting because it's the only way that it fits with my schedule. Is this okay? Yes. So great question. Absolutely, that's okay. This is, again, one of those circumstances where you need to be very mindful of time. Handshake isn't going to give you a little timer that says, all right, your 1:20 to 1:30 meeting is scheduled to end. The camera doesn't cut off at 1:30, so you need to manage your time. So what I would recommend doing is, maybe having a phone beside your screen, put a clock, right beside the screen so it doesn't show too much when you're averting your eyes to see what time it is. And maybe a minute or two, before that one-on-one meeting ends, just let them know, hey, I'm so sorry, but I actually have another meeting right at 1:30, so I'll need to, end that so I can jump on, another meeting. And, people understand that they probably have another one-on-one right at the end of your session too. So just be aware of that. And note for group sessions, you can only join up to about 5 or 10 minutes after the session starts, but then you'll be locked out. Main reason being that if you join in 15 minutes late and you start asking questions, they probably already covered that, and it's distracting to the full group. So you do need to make sure that you're in that group session in the first 5 to 10 minutes, or you won't be able to access it. All right, and I think I saw one more question came in. All right, let's see, one more. Oh, I think we're good. All right, so Phil, do you want to share kind of some last thoughts with students?
Yes, just remember to be patient with your employers, recruiters, as well as yourself. I think that, again, is a word that's used quite often now, that I'm sure you're all familiar with, but these are unprecedented times. So just making sure that you are being adaptive and also receptive to the new ways that you're being asked to show up. And I think that with that in mind, you will really highlight yourself as someone that is a caring and thoughtful potential teammate, which is oftentimes what these employers are looking for.
Mm-hmm. Great points. All right, well, thank you all. Oh, sorry, I want to make sure I get that. All right, thank you all for your time. Really appreciated the great questions that came in. Again, this will all be posted on YouTube for you to access if you want to go back to any different section of the presentation. But I appreciate your time. I appreciate the great questions, and best of luck with the upcoming fair. Again, remember to just keep checking back daily leading up to the event. And don't forget, on the Career Fair event information, we've linked to a couple different tips. So we've linked to our resume guide. We show another sample introduction during a career fair. So make sure you're reading through those resources leading up to the event, and best of luck. All right. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.